First of all, thank you for having me. It's very exciting to see the community growing here, like by the dozens every time. Like I think the last time we were about 30 people, today we're almost 50 or so. So that's pretty cool to just see everything going here. The second thing, I'm very sorry, I forgot all my Vue stickers at home. I got a good bunch of new Vue stickers and I forgot them because it was a very stressful week, so I'll promise I'll bring it over the next time. And today I have the honor of talking about scaling Vue in an existing stack. I guess not everybody's like working Vue full-time already, and it's more like, okay, we're interested in Vue, we heard of it, it's kind of cool, and very often we have the challenge that we want to introduce it to what we have already because like we want to stay on top of modern technologies in general. And what we realize when working with it, working on Greenfield projects is a luxury we very often don't have. It's like there is an existing application, there's a lot of existing code, maybe even an old JavaScript framework that we have that we want to replace over time. I hope everything is readable. The slides will be kind of dark. Yeah, I hope.
Maybe the light again, because I think it was better without it, actually.
I don't know how to turn it off, but
okay, for the recording. Okay, sorry.
Should work anyway, I hope. Otherwise, I'll give you all the slides, so promise me there's something interesting on the slides. And one thing when adding something, there's like new tech to a stack is always a very heavy investment from many different sides. It needs like all engineers to buy in, to learn the new technology, to get like, okay, Vue sounds interesting, okay, that everybody needs to learn it. You personally need to spend a lot of time on understanding the framework of kind of saying, okay, this is what the thing I want to go with, because you will probably spend a lot of time working with the new framework that you're going to use. And also on the backend side, it also very often needs an investment on their side and a buy-in from the whole company or the whole team at least you're working with. We sometimes tend to forget that it's not only us working on things, it's like really a whole team and it has a lot of implications on many sides. That sounds very negative, I know, but we also know it's a very necessary investment from a lot of companies. The ones that don't do it, that don't go with the tech, in general, they are the ones that fall behind to a certain degree because it gets harder to innovate, to stay competitive with everybody else. And yeah, so Vue is luckily a very cool thing to invest in, and that makes the investment very worthwhile, I would say. The other thing is, while adopting something new, there's also competing tech running in parallel on your front end probably. Like almost nobody I know or so, like they have the time to say, I do feature freeze on my application for 1 year and just port over the whole stack to the new front-end framework that I chose because like I have all the time and luxury. That's almost never happening. You always have to do it incrementally. So there's always like this little piece of challenge to say, okay, what if Vue runs in parallel to Angular or to Ember or to just a plain jQuery CoffeeScript stack? There's a lot of challenges coming along with this one. So I'll try to shed some light on this in general. The biggest question that we've faced was where to draw the line between those kind of competing technologies, to where at it. And yeah, there's a lot of challenges coming along, so hopefully we can tackle some of them today in the talk and it makes some clear pictures for you. The other thing that, for example, we realized that a full single page app, even if Vue is like the cool framework to do single page apps, it's sometimes like not the really good thing to do up front. And sometimes it's also not possible to go all in on a single page app as well. So the beauty of Vue itself is it's a progressive framework, so you can add it piece by piece, and this is what we're going to do. So my name's Roman. I'm senior software engineer at CodeShip. We got recently acquired by a bigger company called CloudBees. And you will reach me on Twitter at CodeBrio, and CodeShip is our company Twitter handle. So please feel free to reach out to me at any point if you have any Vue questions or so, or after this talk. And why am I talking to you about this today? It's basically because I've been there and we've done that. We went exactly through the same challenges. We had an old stack that was based on CoffeeScript and some jQuery. It had some Angular in it, so it was like a mess to a certain degree, I would say. So we had to really kind of adopt something new and move forward along the way. So yeah, I went a little bit ahead. We have the stack dictated by CoffeeScript. And also the other challenge that we didn't have a lot of resources at this point. It was a very small company, a very small team, but we had a ton of users using our application on a daily basis. And for them, it's also like, okay, how can you stay competitive doing this? Yeah, and also it's a Rails application in our case. So it was a very backend heavy system, and Rails engineers are very opinionated about their build pipeline or how to do kind of front end, and yeah. So it was a lot of fun to kind of draw this line in the sand to say, okay, we're gonna jump over to Vue and this is how we're gonna do it. So eventually we figured it out, and hopefully this gives you some hope if you have the same battle to fight. And it's sometimes, especially in the beginning, feels like it's you against your team. By saying you're the front-end engineer and the team is like the back-end guys, you're saying, oh, no, that's all bad. The important thing is you need to really have them on your side to say, okay, it's important for us to work together to get them on your side and show them Vue, how awesome Vue is in general, and eventually it will go more hand-in-hand at one point. And that's very important if you want to add a new tag to your stack or so, that you say you have everyone on your side. The important piece we did was, as said, we can't feature freeze, because like if you stop a year or even a month doing nothing on your application, this is a month you will always lose to your competitors. This is a month you'll never get back. So you always have to stay like very agile and move forward. So the important piece for us was to split the whole process in different phases and say, okay, this is how we try to roll it out and how to move forward without kind of putting a roadblock in our way. The first important part is reduce as many unknowns as possible. Yeah, that sounds a little vague or so, but it's a very, very important rule that I can't emphasize enough. Sorry. So what do I mean by reducing things? There's first of all, decide on one language that you're going to use. For example, we had CoffeeScript and some JavaScript, and it was all a little bit over the place. And we said, okay, if we want to move forward, we want to use the latest version of JavaScript. So we basically throw ECMAScript in there, had a Babel build process. We squeezed it in there. It wasn't very easy at this point, but it said, okay, this is very important for us to move forward, to have a very modern stack so you can grow on and get rid of all the unknowns up front. So we ported, for example, all the CoffeeScript files over to JavaScript first. The other thing is remove all the unknowns. Everything you work on and you don't know, okay, what's going to happen if I change this? What happened with kind of like some global variables or so? That's always very, very risky. So you should know everything that you're going to do along the way. Say, okay, like this feature has this requirements and this feature has this requirements. Otherwise, it could be a very bumpy ride. And while porting things over, try to also maybe refactor like bits and pieces. And refactoring is a thing that can make a lot of fun. Yeah, do you see fun face? Okay. So refactoring, that's not so. No, it's really fun or so to take, okay, this is how the code runs right now. Now, with all the things I learned in the last year maybe or so, I'll take the risk and refactor it a little bit along the way. A small example. What we did here is we had like, this was just a plain CoffeeScript function that's basically adding a click event and does something with kind of sending AJAX requests to the server. Basically, JavaScript that was all over the place in our application at this point. The first step we did is basically just port it over to JavaScript. This eliminates, as we said, reduces the scope of languages. So we have one language now, it's all JavaScript. So we're on a better side already. And by refactoring, why not go the extra mile and say, okay, like reduce even jQuery at this point. Remove it. You don't need it for kind of working with a small click event on an array or an element. You can use everything that JavaScript has to offer for us. We have the array methods. We can fetch directly in the browser. It's all supported there. So that's quite nice. And yeah, just handle your way forward going through. The next phase. We're ready to introduce Vue, and that's why we're all here about, I guess. Introducing Vue to the stack is probably the most fun part for most of us, because we finally can work on the thing that we're looking forward to. But it's also a challenging part, I would say. When we want to introduce Vue, we first should choose a very manageable target. We should choose a small target that we know all the requirements of. As we say, every unknown that we have is a risk. So if you work on a new feature while adding new view, it's like, it always happens that like, new things, new kind of steps and feature requests come in while you're working on it. So ideally take something that you know, okay, this is how it looks, this is how the API works, this is, you know it from A to B, the whole feature. And that's like a very good way to introduce Vue because this lets you focus on introducing the language or the framework in this case and not on the feature itself. So define one clear entry point for Vue on the page. And then also, let's go simple up front, load Vue directly from a CDN. We don't need to go crazy right now to say, okay, like we do all our Webpack build process up front. As we heard, Vue is very progressive, so that allows us to do a lot of cool things with just loading Vue from a CDN. The other thing is, we could, sorry, my screen is so dark, it's very hard to read. We can try to use what Vue offers for us out of the box as much as possible. Vue comes with a lot of cool tools that we can leverage and to get really good results up front. So try to really use what Vue offers you. One of the first requests I hear very often, oh, how can I get jQuery run in Vue? It's always like, try to understand what Vue tries to do, how it works internally. And you will very fast realize, okay, there's no way or no need for jQuery to interact with DOM nodes on the page in any way. Like Vue has everything figured out. It just takes a little bit of a different approach there. So what do you mean by clear entry point? This could look as simple as this, that you have like your div tag on the page where you say, okay, like this is where we'll add Vue to the page. Just call it Vue feature. In this case, it's like a status page indicator for us. We were loading the status page from their API and saying, okay, everything is fine and our backend services are not. But it's the clear entry point where we say, okay, this is where we draw the line where Vue will take over. The script that we can introduce afterwards is, let's go as simple as possible. We drop in the CDN link directly and say, okay, we're ready to write Vue out of the box. So what we're doing, we just instantiate a new Vue instance. We give it the element for the Vue feature. And we define, for example, it's currently loading because we're trying to fetch the status. And this is our template, how it looks like. Please don't get hung up that it's a string template for now. It's like just for the ease of using. Of course, there's a lot of conversations going on. You should never use string templates. I think for the ease of the example and for sometimes it's still fine to use string templates. So yeah, it's a good start. The next question here very often, and the challenge that we also faced is, how do we pass in data from the outside into our Vue application or the code that we want to do? I saw a lot of really, really weird approaches there, where you hook into the Vue lifecycle in the kind of internal methods that they provide and then do a lot of crazy stuff and import other 10 libraries that help you doing it. It's very simple in Vue as well. Leverage the Vue lifecycle itself as much as possible. Vue offers, again, everything that it has. So just dig a little deeper what it does. What I mean by this, for example, Vue has a before mount method. So the lifecycle, if you've never seen the Vue lifecycle, I should have probably put a screen for that in there. But it basically goes through that you have like, it's a created instance or created file as a function there. Then it can check if it's updated anyway, then it's mounted and before mounted. So it gives you a lot of options to hook into the Vue lifecycle to say, okay, I want to fire my own methods along the way. And in this case, before mount works just fine. Why does it work? What we do is the element reference is a small piece in Vue that gives you access to the element, to the DOM node itself. When we have our template, basically, what's in here, if we run Vue and it's kind of mounted, then basically what we expect is that the template is in part where our entry point was. So if we take the before mount, we can actually reference this element, and then we have the reference to the old DOM node, to the one that we just referenced up there. And then just read the dataset URL of it, and you have it already in your instance, and then you proceed forward, and Vue will take care of all the rest. But this is the easiest way of getting like data from the outside passed into your Vue instance without a lot of magic. So that's quite simple. Sorry? Oh, no question, okay. Yeah, the other thing, like a little tip on the side, if you want to do like more sophisticated stuff up front or so, or maybe like this element reference is not the right thing to do for you right now, There's also this way in Vue mounting something on the page by using, for example, the mount option directly. If you say like it's maybe programmatically because you pass in even the name for the function or it comes from somewhere else. So you can use the mount function if you don't want to use the element reference. And the other thing that I would just want to show here, especially in the beginning, it's nice if a lot of things come from the back end. Vue allows you to use kind of a script tag, passing in a template, and use this as a reference node to say, okay, that's where the template comes from. We had this running at one point or so just to move fast to a certain degree because we didn't want to port everything over to string templates. And a lot of things were coming from the back end as slim templates, and they look kind of quite different. So it was a little bit work we tried to save for ourselves. And in this case, we used the script tag there and just referenced it directly. And that helped us also to save time and proceed forward by adding Vue. So that's just a small tip on the side I added especially for you. So then the next big feature that we should do by adding everything is we should probably improve our build process that we're using. We've seen so far, we added the CDN link, and we also heard that our Rails engineers have a very certain way of doing things. We want to take control of what's going on. We're kind of, Vue allows us to do a lot of cool things, and we want to control every aspect of building the application, of building like JavaScript on our client side. And in this case, all I can say is that Webpack is very much your friend. If you've not worked off, who has not worked with Webpack so far? Well, a minority. Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. It's totally fine. But it's very good that most people know Webpack, that they work with it. And it just speaks for the tool itself. It became quite of a standard. Why? Because it handles a lot of things like really, really well. It figured out the complex pieces of building something, gives you opportunities to kind of split up packs by default, kind of lazy load other packages. And if you go the Webpack route, it's usually a safe bet that you have some support for what you're trying to do eventually there. I currently feel that like rolling your own Webpack or your own Packer system is like a hot stuff to do. No, don't do it. It's not worth it. Take what's there, and that usually works very well. So what do I mean by this? Before, for example, we in our application, we had this very small and simple build stack. It was like the JavaScript files, they were kind of like in one place. And then we did our Rails application magic with the asset pipeline. And what it did, it just compiled files, did like a little bits and pieces here. And then we serve everything down to the app. Yeah, well, that's not ideal, especially as we add our Vue to the stack. It was just added here and say, okay, now it's kind of part of the whole chunk there and will kind of be served to the client. That's okay, but it's probably not the situation that we want to have, because as we said, we want to have control. Webpack allows us to do this. So let's go the extra mile and say, okay, why not introduce this build step in parallel? You can add your own Vue files, use Webpack, build your own build process exactly matching what you need, and then serve it alongside the old JavaScript. That usually works quite well. The important piece here is, if we look at the build process, aim for a very, very clean separation when doing though. There's sometimes like this need, and I did this error myself. It was like, okay, there were a lot of globals coming from the old code. And as they both were loaded on the same page, and I said, okay, like the new Webpack stuff comes in, the Vue application was using a helper method that was available globally. Try to avoid this as much as possible. Because at one point you will diverge to a certain degree, and then you don't want to kind of like update everything in the old stack. You want to have it in the new stack. So take this time, pull it over. Don't kind of use any legacy code from now on, because Webpack is the way we want to go further. And also, what allows it to do is like, it's the perfect time for us to introduce Vue single file components. If you have never heard of Vue single file components, it's basically a .vue file that gives you access to a template, to script tag, and to style. So it allows you to write everything in one file, basically. That's quite nice. How does this look like? A .vue file could look something like this. On top, we define the template. We use the template syntax here, and it looks exactly like HTML looks. This is very handy to work with in a bigger scale. You have all the syntax highlighting here, and at this point, even by using Webpack and using Vue single file components, you would even have the possibility to add something like your own kind of template language. If you feel like you want to use Pug, for example, you just add in a reference to the language Pug, and then you can use puck templates right in there, or whatever you prefer. The next thing is you just define your script on there. How it usually works, you export default and create just the object, and the Vue loader running through Webpack will take care of kind of parsing everything of this Vue file for you and put it into one Vue instance that you can then use as components or however you want to consume it. What's the nice thing? And in this case, I just ported over what we had before. And this is how it looks, and I think it looks a little cleaner than just kind of everything meshed into the page. Are you ready for the real cool stuff? First, dramatic drinking pause. Let's build a single page app. Well, didn't you say an SPA doesn't make sense? Yeah, I said this in the beginning, and it probably is still right. Going full SPA still doesn't make sense. If we port everything over, that's a world of pain, I would say, and probably not worth the time up front. But why not treat it as different SPAs? Why not have, okay, there's a single page application running as part of my whole application. Eventually, what I could do is I can have different pages and I can treat all these pages as their own like single page applications. For example, I have a subscription page. Everything on subscription-wise kind of logically works together, like all the plans you want to choose and kind of credit card and all the checkout process maybe. This is a thing that works together that's kind of like logically very tightly coupled. Why not move this in a single page app? It doesn't need to know anything more about the application than just like, okay, this is, I know how to do subscriptions. The other thing is a part like, in this case for us, we have build lists of kind of people contributing and running from GitHub directly their builds. So we treat this as a single page app. It needs to know nothing more than this and so forth on. So everything that's kind of logically bound together, let's treat it as its own like little bit. And also what it allows us, right now it allows us to go full in on the Vue ecosystem. It has a lot of really cool powers for us. There's a lot of cool tools in the Vue ecosystem. Like if we want to use Vue router at one point or so, that's nice. But I would say the most important piece is Vuex or Vuex or however you want to pronounce it. It's like just a Redux architecture state management library. I guess everybody, or who has not heard of Vuex? Okay, cool, everybody's using it. That's amazing. So let's see if I can still tell you something cool. Let's see. The important piece here, if we want to go full in on the Vue ecosystem, here I have a nice blog post from GitLab put in. Even GitLab, like they did the same journey as we as CodeShip. And after 1 year, they had the blog post, like this is what GitLab learned in 1 year of kind of adopting Vue. And the first big thing that jumped out to me was, okay, just use Vuex. Don't go the route of doing everything like component-based state and the application state. It's very, very painful. If you have your state of the application split up to multiple pieces and levels and everywhere, that's quite challenging, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong eventually. So Vuex out of the box is a nice thing to add. So let's go back to our cool build process that we did before. And now we're about ready to create this kind of clean entry layer. As we said, we want to build different SPAs. So what we will do now is we define what page you're loading on. You go either one package from the Webpack build or you get one from the old one. And that's where it already pays off why we didn't port anything from the legacy base or used anything from the global code base out there up front. Because we now have this clean layer and it allows us to move forward in a faster way. And we have pages that run really on their own in the new, complete new stack where we have everything under Vue, and that's quite a good experience. And yeah, that's usually a good way to go. And the next thing that is we could do by using Webpack in this process, we could even start building multiple packs along the way. Treat your SPAs as their own little bits and pieces and dependencies, split it up in multiple files, and load one of them on the page that makes sense maybe. This reduces the footprint of your JavaScript on the page enormously, gives you a lot of control, and removes a lot of side effects that sometimes happen. So what did we do? For us was the entry point, again, was very important to draw a very clean line, what Vue will take over and what the old application, or in this case, comes from the backend. What we did here is we created a helper method that was called like Vue app. and we pass it in, for example, users. The method under the hood, what it does is like it says, okay, I need to load something of users, so I know which pack I need to load, and it will inject it on the page for you when you render the page. But that's all it does, is so it creates this clear, clean entry point. If you're more familiar with PHP, in this case it's a Slim template. In PHP it could look something like this. Like the important piece is just create this very clean layer where it's okay, now the Vue app will take over. So what this allows us, for example, users will automatically load the users pack for us. And under the hood, it's like not a lot of magic. It will just print out something like this Vue app HTML or so, however you want to build it in one way. But that's usually a very clean layer that's okay. It helps you separate it in a very easy way. The next challenge was, again, we want to pass in data to our instance. So the other important piece is we have a big backend system. There's all the data there. And maybe we don't have the time to build an API endpoint for everything. So that's a very good start to say, okay, like let's just add everything that we have on the page to the Vue instance already. If we have like the whole collection of our users, just pass it in, because that's the one that we need on the page. And we reduce again the time that we need to load the data afterwards. We have it on the page ready. The other thing, if we want to pass in something like a role, just pass it in. You have it on the page. You don't need to go like crazy and pull everything out. It's there for you. And magically what it does for us, it starts creating like those data attributes and passes everything in that we want to consume. So what we need to do now is basically we want to mount Vue. We want to add our store, because we learned, okay, state management should all be done by Vuex. And then we pass in the data that we created to our Vue application. So bear with me, that's maybe a little tricky or so, but that's like how we try to figure out. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask at one point or afterwards. So what we did is we created ourselves a little helper function, a little helper kind of library that allows us to mount everything on the page in a very simple way. So what we try to do is we just import Vue, Vuex, and in this case just use Lodash for entries and merge. And the important piece is we created an app function. The app function should then take care of like loading everything on the page and automatically kind of do the right things for us to prepare it in a consistent way, because the less you have to repeat yourself, the easier it is to kind of avoid any mistakes along the path. So the next thing is to do, we want to use Vuex anyway, so let's just add it to Vue in this case. And the next thing is, we also know, okay, this is the Vue app element that was generated by our helper, so we exactly know how the entry point will look like. So just create the node reference, and this is how it will look on the page. Let's go forward. That's also a right place to put in maybe a default store. If you have like some automatic methods that you want to have available on every page, like we had some static values that were passed on like depending on some languages or some user attributes, we don't want to introduce it in every single store file that we're doing. We just use the app function to kind of like build it for us already, say, okay, this will be available in every store and every single page app anyway, and that's how we do it. And the next thing is the custom store that we will pass in will just be merged with the default store. And worst case, we don't need to create a new store on a single page app because it's very simple, but we maybe want to have access to the values that we have on every page. The default store comes for us prepared already. Let's go forward. The next thing is we want to pass in all the data. And in this case, we want to be a little smarter. We want to do a little bit more validation maybe on point to have a lot of control over everything. So we try to use props. What we do, again, we take the node, we render over all the data set, like all the values in there, and we try to parse what's able to be parsed as JSON. And the other thing, we just try to pass it down and create kind of a props object that will look very much like how you would pass some props. If you're familiar maybe with Vue 1, there was like this, I think, props data property at one point that was mostly thought to allow unit testing in a very clean way. But it was very easy to kind of abuse it to pass in data using props data and made something simpler. In this case, we cannot do this any longer because it was removed from Vue 2, so you only can pass props from a root instance to a component. In this place, we create our props object to go this route, to follow what Vue wants us to do anyway. And now the important piece is we create our Vue instance. We call it app in this case. And we pass in the store directly that we want to use on the page. And we try to use a render function here just to have this like very simple way of adding the app to the page. And the important piece here is that's where we pass in the component that was the first entry point that our app should load eventually, and pass in the props to the component. So that makes it quite nicely to consume everything. And here we take like the Vue instance and mount it to the node that we have referenced on the page. Seems like a lot of magic. It's quite simple actually, and kind of it just allows you to do everything in a very consistent way. So how would, for example, our entry point, our pack file eventually look like? It's just as easy as we import the app library. We import our custom store, for example, for users, and we import our main Vue instance that we want to use. What's the user's index file, or how you want to call it. And all we do is kind of we pass in app, say users, and pass in the store directly. So that's nice. And our Vue file could look as simple as this, where we say, okay, we loop over all the users. The important piece here is everything we passed before on our Vue app. In this case, we can consume it as props directly. So this allows you to even use like validation on it, or add some default values if something is not there. So it gives you a lot of control over what's going on, and just makes the API consistent and very easy to maintain. Yeah. The next thing is, if you work with store, there's like one thing I want to put in, because like I saw it at some kind of project that I review. If you don't use getters yet, I can highly recommend to use getters as much as possible. There's like this way of consuming the store directly, or use it as a computed property. In this case, I would highly recommend to use a store, add getters to it as much as possible, and then also already think ahead and try to build those getter system for you as clean as possible. Because as we said before, whenever you have to do a lot of things manually, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, or you have to keep a lot of things in mind. Here's for example, what we try to do is if we have a lot of getters, and this is a very simple example, but like if your store is like really large with a ton of different states and it comes from different modules even, what we try to do is we created something like internal getters that we just kind of prefix with an underscore, that we say they are not thought to be consumed from the outside, but we defined one that's called, for example, current, that has like all the important bits and pieces in there and shares it for me. So this allows me basically on our component side, we can just map over the getters and pull the current one in. And this gives you also a very clean API of kind of working with even more complex stores in a very nice way. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with computed properties and what's their big benefit, but the other benefit you get with it, getters are internally also treated as computed properties. So that said, if you have your current one and something in there changes, it will automatically reevaluate. But if you have a more complex getter function in there, like this even is probably a simple operation because we just slice an array. But what we try to do is we leverage the kind of the output of the computed factory, the cached value in our getter that we send down to the client. And for more complex operations, this allows you also to kind of prevent some re-renderings or some kind of reprocessing in a very smart way. And then I would say the important piece is if we have everything running, that's when you can get ready to scale. As we said, there can be multiple single-page apps in your application. Build it in a clean way. Let's say if we have like 3 different packs that we end up doing it, maybe you want to consume some of them multiple pages. If we have something that's like rendering lists, what prevents me from using this render list function on a user list page or so, and maybe also in the admin interface to render like all the users for the admin interface? Be smart about reusing what you've built or so, and using Vue and all those single page apps and those extra packs or so allows you to really kind of be very fast and quicker so in updating things. The important piece there is prepare some scaffolding and generators as much as possible. If you do a lot of things and reproduce, what we did, for example, we created a generator in Rails, which just said, okay, generate a new Vue app called settings maybe. And what it does for us, it creates the pack file, the app file, and the spec file for testing already with some boilerplate code filled in. This just allows us to get a very clean entry point for every new page we do. And if you scale your team, if you have multiple people working on something, this allows you to be very efficient and will prevent kind of failure or different approaches at one point. So this is very clean. Also, what I can only highly recommend is everything that you do, try to back it up with a lot of solid patterns and specs ideally. We don't want to have things breaking for us along the way. And if we follow all this, and we kind of went through this process, and we're now at a point where say like we have a lot of really good times ahead. We're really fast now kind of with building new features, with parallelizing, with having multiple people working on different features at the same time, but yet the code underneath is all usable and everybody knows how the other pieces work. So that's really nice for us. And the big question in the beginning for me was always, why do you want to add something to the stack? And this is the things why it pays off. For example, we had a lot of acceptance tests before that were taking a long time, and this was like the amount that we need to verify that everything was running on the page, because you had no cleaner way of testing everything running with CoffeeScript and jQuery, and you had to verify like the simple pieces with acceptance tests, because that's the only thing that gave you assurance. Now, using Vue, we can do way more things in unit tests, and this shaved down a lot of time from our test suite in being able to ship faster and having less like error-prone errors running in the pipelines. The other thing also, by going this process down, page speed basically. We were able to kind of have the initial page rendering on one of our heavier pages with a very simple stack and kind of moving this way down from 2 seconds to kind of 0.25 seconds. So that's a huge win for just like going way down of a clean kind of architecture and using this. And as said before, it also allows you to kind of scale your team to work on different features at the same time. Everybody can work on its own and there's no way of like you're breaking somebody else's code or somebody else's pages. So it gives you a very clean way of working on your application. The good and important piece for me is Vue made it all very enjoyable going down the route. And why? Because basically Vue is for me JavaScript just done right. Thanks.